Good morning, dear students. Today we are going to listen to a fairy tale. And don't smile because you think that you are beyond a fairy tale. But this is something that you will have to listen to. In your life, you must have either listened to the story from either books or from some others. This is all about the story about a little girl, and such stories were there as bedtime stories in the Western world. And some of these stories have come over to our own country also. It is about Little Red Riding Hood. I'm going to give you the original version of Little Red Riding Hood. What you have is a newer version of Little Red Riding Hood. The same story line or the same type of characters, but a different version. And you can make different versions of the story in your own way, including all those things that you are now familiar with, which the writer or the storyteller was not familiar with earlier. As you all know, writing came much later. It was the oral storytelling habit that was existent at that time. It is more or less called orature or oral literature. People told the stories, and these stories were handed down to the next generation, and so on. And maybe we have lost something in passing the story over to the next generation. But you find Brothers Grimm had collected these stories and published it. One such story is that of Little Red Riding Hood. One day, a mother called her daughter, and the daughter's name is Little Red Riding Hood. We know that Little Red Riding Hood is not actually a name, but she has got this habit of wearing a red riding hood, a hood that covered her face and which has got the color red. And she was named, she always used to wear it, and so she was named Little Red Riding Hood. So the mother called the daughter and told her that today you are to undertake a journey. The journey is to the other side of the forest. They are living on one side of the forest, and she is to cross the forest and reach the other side where her grandmother is living. So the mother had made some things and some cookies, some important things, some eatables, and she asked the daughter to take it to the grandmother. And Little Red Riding Hood agreed. She was so very happy. So the mother packed all the goodies and packed them and gave it to Little Red Riding Hood. And before starting the journey, as all mothers do, this mother, or Little Red Riding Hood's mother, also gave some advice to the daughter. The advice is that you are traveling through the forest, do not stop and talk to strangers. That is one advice. So, with this good advice, the mother sent the daughter all alone through the forest to the other side of the forest to the grandmother's house. Little Red Riding Hood started her journey, and as she was journeying through the forest, a wolf came to see this little girl because maybe of a Red Riding Hood she was quite visible. So the wolf smelled that it is good food for him. So he really wanted to eat the little girl. But somehow or other, he understood that it is no use trying to encounter her. So this wolf came and to asked her, Little Red Riding Hood, Little Red Riding Hood, where are you going? And he asked her once, and when she didn't answer the first time, he came the other way, and after some time he came and stopped and asked her once again, Little Red Riding Hood, where are you going? And forgetting her mother's advice, Little Red Riding Hood talked to the wolf and told him that she is going to her grandmother's house quite across the forest, uh, uh, qui- um, which is across the forest. And she didn't think twice about it. And the wolf just disappeared, slinked away into the forest. And the wolf ran faster and reached the destination of Little Red Riding Hood, and that is that of the grandmother, and went inside her hut. And the grandmother was quite astonished. Before she could do anything, the wolf killed the grandmother, ate her, and wore her dresses and slept and lay down on the cot, waiting for Little Red Riding Hood to come. So here you find that this wolf is really tricky. So he wanted to have one more meal also, that of Little Red Riding Hood. So he waited for Little Red Riding Hood to come. Little Red Riding Hood walked through the forest and finally reached the grandmother's house. And on reaching the grandmother's house, she knocked at the door. And then knocking the house at the door, she heard a voice asking her to come in. And she was a little bit hesitant. She asked, Grandmother, Grandmother, why is your voice so gruff? And the wolf immediately understood that he will be recognized and she may not enter. So, making his voice as sweet as possible, the wolf told her that my voice is gruff now, but I am waiting for you to come and I will make it all the more sweeter for you. And then she entered the house because it was quite dark inside the hut. She was not able to see the grandmother's face, and the grandmother was covered with a blanket, and so she didn't think twice about it. So she asked the grandmother, 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 why are you lying down? Are you not feeling well? And the grandmother, that is the wolf dressed as the grandmother, told her, well, I'm not feeling that well. You come near and just kiss me. And obediently, the little girl, that is Little Red Riding Hood, went over, and the wolf just wrapped his arms around the little girl. And the little girl, feeling the arms, just touched them and said, why is your arm so rough and so skinny, grandmother? And the grandmother, or the wolf in grandmother's clothes, told her that I am so weak, that's why come nearer, dear. And so she came once more nearer, and the little girl, Little Red Riding Hood, asked the wolf, Grandmother, Grandmother, Grandma, Grandma, why is your face so thin? Or why is your mouth so open? And the wolf said, well, this is for me to eat you. He took his original voice and started doing this. And so here you find that he was in a way trying to eat the little girl. So the little girl was frightened and she just ran away. And the wolf was sleeping, or and after some time she hid somewhere, and the wolf was sleeping because he had a heavy meal of the grandmother. So the grandmother, while the wolf was sleeping, Little Red Riding Hood waited, and taking a knife, she cut open the wolf's stomach, and the grandmother jumped out of the stomach. And together, grandmother and granddaughter decided to drown the wolf. So instead of uh, doing anything else, or instead of waking him up, they put some stones and bricks inside the stomach of the wolf and stitched it once again. And they just hid till the wolf woke up. And the wolf woke up, and he was so very thirsty. He did not know that the grandmother had jumped out of his stomach, and nor does he know that Little Red Riding Hood was waiting with the grandmother. So he went to drink a sip of water from the river nearby. And so he went outside the hut and went nearer the stream which was passing through and started drinking. And because of the weight of his stomach, when he bent down to drink the water, he was pushed, or he just fell into the stream and drowned. Grandmother and granddaughter returned home quite happy and satisfied that the wolf is already dead. And together they came to the hut, and grandmother and granddaughter had the best of times. They started eating and talking, and this is how the story ends. This is an old story. As I've told you, when I tell you the story, there should be no questions. This is how the fairy tales were fashioned in those days. I'm telling you even now also, don't ask me questions about the story. There can be some loopholes. This is the old fashioned, the old story, old fairy tale as it existed and as it was told to the listeners. Here you will notice a lot of loopholes for the story. You can, in a way, think of those loopholes. But the main thing is that in the modern day, this is writing from a woman's perspective, and a woman's perspective and women's liberation. All these are things which really we understand because we have been going through a lot of literature and also the life, and years had passed through, and the times in which Little Red Riding Hood lived and the grandmother lived were times when the mothers always gave advice to little daughters, not just little daughters, but to daughters in general. And the one and the most important aspect is do not trust strangers, which is a very valuable information to pass on to any child of yours, whether it is a female or a male. Nowadays, in the Western countries and even in our country also, the parents, the school also give them advice: do not talk to strangers, because once you start talking to the strangers, they have a way of charming you with their talk and making you do things which they would like you to do it, but maybe totally against nature. And so this advice is given in the modern times also. But in those days, this advice is given to the girls alone, and they are going to travel through the forest. The forest represents the travails of life, and it is dark, and the way is uncertain, and there are a lot of things, harmful animals in the forest. This is why the advice was given: do not talk to strangers. Strangers can also be wolves, and the storyteller had chosen not a tiger or any other animal but only a wolf. And the wolf, instead of directly attacking her, had used an indirect method, hiding always, coming up at times, and asking her question after question, trying to charm her. And poor little Red Riding Hood just didn't know the pitfalls of talking to a stranger, and she totally disregarded the advice of the mother, and this landed her in danger. This is the sum total of the story, or this is how it should be taken. And the wolf stands for any male who has designs on a young lady, and they will charm you and will have their way with you. So, this is what the mother was warning the daughter against. And the forest itself is full of dangers, and the forest here represents the world as it is. And the destination is grandmother's house, where the house is a place of comfort. Even that comfortable house is not comfortable because it is filled with perils, and the wolf being there and imitating the grandmother shows how pretentious that so-called comfortable house can be to a young girl. Maybe it represents the house of the in-laws, and whatever it is, it stands as such. So she must be very careful, and that's why she asked the question, why is your voice so gruff, oh dear grandmother? And the wolf answered, because the grandmother was having a fever and she was ill. And even then her doubts did not cease. She remembered her mother's advice, and she again asked the question, why is your arm so rough? Not soft like your grandmother. An old lady's hands will be soft as the years go by. And even then, you find that this is not answered, or in a way, it was answered, but there was that unexpected attack from the wolf. And this unexpected attack really took her unawares, but she had the presence of mind to jump out through the door and go outside and wait till the wolf slept. Because of the heavy meal he had, the wolf slept, and this was an opportune time for her. But even then, with the help of the grandmother who advised her from the stomach of the wolf, she was able to perform this cutting of the stomach and taking out the grandmother. And together, the two ladies, the old one and the little one, both used all their resources, their strength, and put stones and bricks in the stomach of the wolf, because their intention was to destroy him. And they couldn't do it in any other way because he represents a lot of strength. And they were totally against it. One is very old and the other is young. So, two ladies are not just enough for a man, a strong man. This is how it is to be read in the modern times. The questions are always there, I know, but the answers are also equally important. And these answers just do not consider anyone, or maybe it was necessary in those days. As advices go, this is sane advice a mother will give to a daughter. Even now, also, you will find that in spite of the liberated times, in spite of the modernity, I know that our town, our Trichur, is not that modern. And definitely, a mother will give, or even if it is not given, the girls are aware that after 7 o'clock it is not safe to travel in your town because people will look strangely at you. That is one thing. Another, you won't find a girl or a woman in the streets at after 7 o'clock. But times are changing, and there was a lot of things coming up to bring the people out of their houses after 7 o'clock, especially women, so that they can also enjoy the life in the town. But even then, we are reluctant to do that. And even in your village, if you are from a village, definitely not out after 7 o'clock. So these are restrictions which we are all familiar with. It is these restrictions that you have to reread and also to understand. And this is why you have a new perspective of the Little Red Riding Hood story. I have not used any write ups for this, any slides for this, because you have to understand that this is orature. These stories, fairy tales, are tales which have to be told rather than to be narrated. And so I have told you the story. Maybe there is something that I have missed in my telling, There is a slight change for the earlier story. If there is change, you can find that out and incorporate it into your storytelling. But the story that you have to study in your book is by a very modern lady, very modern in in the sense that it is by James Finn Garner, not by a lady, but you'll find that it is Little Red Riding Hood, the story says, and you find in each and every line the modernity. You can't just distinguish a person as man or woman. Like, for example, uh, if a woman is a chairman, what will you call her? You can use the term chairman. The chairman of our college is such and such person, a girl. Instead of a chairman, you can't call her a chairwoman. So you call her a chairperson. Okay, that's a term that is used in the modern times. And you can't just say that that person is deaf and dumb. You can't use those terms because the psychologists and a lot of people fighting for the disabled will say that they are lack something, only that. And you find that there are physically challenged people and mentally challenged people. These are the terms that we have to use in the modern times. And using all these modernity, here there is a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. I hope you can understand what I'm trying to say. And I will read out the first paragraph of this story, retold story. There was once a young person named Red Riding Hood who lived with her mother on the edge of a large wood. One day her mother asked her to take a basket of fresh fruit and mineral water to her grandmother's house, not because this was woman's work, mind you, but because the deed was generous and helped engender a feeling of community. So even in that first paragraph, if you take the book, you will find it in page 77. You find the story. There was once a young person, not a young girl, okay, named Red Riding Hood. That little part is dropped because it is now a young lady who lived with her mother on the edge of a large wood. Means instead of forest, maybe it is a wood. Wood is compared to a forest smaller. So her mother asked her to take a basket of fresh fruit and mineral water. Imagine taking fresh fruit and mineral water across this wood to another person as if water is not available. Mineral water, definitely, because that is the norm. Basket of fresh fruit, of course, this is what you take. Basket of fresh fruit and mineral water are the things, or even a bottle of wine is indeed something that you take when you see a person who is sick or in the hospital or who is ill. And instead of wine, maybe mineral water. So that basket of fruit and mineral water is the norm for the young fashionable people to take to visit the people who are sickly. So the fresh fruit and mineral water she is to take to her grandmother's house, not because this was woman's work, mind you, but because the deed was generous and helped engender a feeling of community. This the mother asked the daughter. There is no mention of the son or the father or the grandfather. Mother, daughter, and grandmother. I hope you will notice this kind of change that is in the storytelling. In the storytelling, also in the original story, also it is the mother sending her daughter to the grandmother. There is no question of daughter or the father or the son or even the grandfather. It is not even mentioned whether they are living or dead. Nothing is mentioned. And here there is one more point to be remembered. That is, the mother is sending the daughter not because it is the thing to do by a woman, but because the deed was generous and helped engender a feeling of community. The community, the feeling from mother to the grandmother through the granddaughter. Okay, I hope you are getting a totally different version of the story. Good. In the next paragraph, it says, furthermore, her grandmother was not sick, but rather was in full physical and mental health and was fully capable of taking care of herself as a mature adult. The grandmother was not old. The term old is not used here. And you will also notice that in the story, even though the title is Little Red Riding Hood, the term little is not used anywhere in the story. You will have to keep that in mind. And the term old is also not used here. The grandmother was not sick, but was in full physical and mental health and was fully capable of taking care of herself as a mature adult. So the term compensated for old is mature adult. Okay, I hope the story is getting interesting. The new version is really getting interesting. So Red Riding Hood set off with a basket through the woods. Many people believed that the forest was a foreboding and dangerous place and never set foot in it. Red Riding Hood, however, was confident enough in her own budding sexuality that such obvious Freudian imagery did not intimidate her. I think you are getting your hands full with this. So, Little Riding Hood was riding through or going through the woods with a basket, and many people believed that forest is a foreboding place. It is even now also. It is also a dangerous place. That also is equally true. And most of them never set foot in it unless you go for trekking, of course, with the forest guards. And some people go even without the help of the forest guard also. And some people wander in the forest and they have no idea how to get out of the forest. That also happens. So it is a dangerous place for people to set foot in. Red Riding Hood, however, was confident enough in her own budding sexuality that such obvious Freudian imagery did not intimidate her. So, why did the author connect the forest with Red Riding Hood and her sexuality and the Freudian imagery? As I told you earlier, forest is taken as of the world as such a dangerous place to be in, and the dangers lurking here and there, like the wolf and the other ferocious animals, and the caution is always necessary. Sometimes people never ventured out into the open. They are so quite comfortable with the home and the hearth, and they never ventured into the other lands or ever traveled outside their world. That was the norm of the day. Unless you are a merchant who is trying to sell ware, and then you start walking from one place to the other, travel from one place to the other. So, why did the author mention the budding sexuality of Red Riding Hood and the Freudian imagery here? The thing is that this is a warning to young girls. And so, a young girl, when she becomes a mature girl, the mother warns her about a lot of things. You can't do this, you can't do this, a lot of taboos. All these are necessary in the sense that they are caution for a young girl to walk in this world. And most often, if the mothers are not willing enough, they forbid her from going to such and such places. And this forest or the wood represents, according to the psychology, a forest which is indeed the dark and dangerous place for young people, especially young girls, and it is also a dangerous world, the modern world, which is very dangerous. This is why the author had used the two terms, the budding sexuality of Red Riding Hood and also the Freudian imagery. So here you find that these things did not really intimidate her. But even then, you find that it is a long way to go. On the way to Grandma's house, Red Riding Hood was accosted by a wolf who asked her what was in her basket. She replied, "Some helpful snacks for my grandmother, who is certainly capable of taking care of herself as a mature adult." Here, the advice given to the mother is not mentioned, given by the mother is not mentioned. And on the way to the grandmother's house, Red Riding Hood was accosted by a wolf. Accosted is not a meeting, it is a kind of a threatening. A meeting which has got a threat, intimidating type of uh, meeting. And he was accosted by a wolf who asked her what was in her basket. And we know that the basket has fresh fruit and mineral water, as the author had mentioned in the first paragraph. But when asked by a stranger like the wolf, little red or not little Red Riding Hood replied, "It is some helpful snacks for my grandmother, who is certainly capable of taking care of herself as a mature adult." If you read it like this, it is some food for my grandmother who is old, okay, but capable of taking care of herself. But instead of old, the author had substituted it with the term mature adult. So when you read the story, these terms come up, and as it is, this indeed has got a lot of relevance. The wolf said, "You know, my dear, it isn't safe for a little girl to walk through these woods alone." The term little is used by the wolf, not by anybody else. So the wolf now becomes so very considerate, and he calls her a little girl. So he says, "You know, my dear, it isn't safe for a little girl to walk through these woods alone." Red Riding Hood replied to this, "I find your sexist remark offensive in the extreme, but I will ignore it." And she says there is a reason why she will ignore the sexist remark from the wolf, because it has got its own connotation. And the reason is that the she is so very vehement, and she is so very much into the norm of being a feminist. We can even call her a feminist because she thinks that it is a sexist remark, and because of your traditional status as an outcast from society, the stress of which has caused you to develop your own entirely valid world view. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must be on my way. She is very confident. And I hate your sexist remark. That again is indeed indicative of the fact that she is against the term little girl. Little girl, that is sexist, using her or calling her a girl, and that is sexist. And so she says, "Well, of course, I can understand why you have used such term, because by your traditional status, you are an outcast from society. You are an outcast from society means this wolf is a lone wolf. The wolf goes by pack. Pack means group. That is how it usually goes. This wolf is not along with the pack. For hunting and everything, they usually live as a pack. Pack means as a group. And he is not part of the pack. He is an outcast. He is separate from that pack. Otherwise, his fellows would be next to him. Because he is walking alone, Red Riding Hood assumes that he is the lone wolf of the wilderness, and because of this status of being an outcast from society, it had really caused him stress, and this has made you develop your own entirely valid worldview. And maybe this is why you called me little girl and told me that it is dangerous to walk in the woods alone. Now, I will excuse you all this. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must be on my way. She is very cool and collected about it. Red Riding Hood walked on along the main path. So the lady has got a lot of courage and she has got a lot of words also. She is also psychoanalyzing the wolf also. The wolf stands for a stranger or a man, and she is just cutting him down to size through her remark. Okay, we have more to continue, though it's a very short story, but I think we'll continue in the next class. I hope it is okay for you to read Grimm's fairy tales and read the original story and then start reading the story. I have already told you the story, but you can really enjoy it by taking Grimm's fairy tales and reading this particular story from there and enjoy it in your own way and then start reading your story. And so I'm leaving it to you. You can read it and enjoy it. We'll continue it in the next class. Thank you.